Shelby Smith. I own Jiminy Crickets. We are standing in the cricket barn, or the cricket castle is what I like to call it. And I raise crickets. These crickets are raised for human consumption. So they're turned into tasty protein-packed snacks. But first, like any other farm or any other animal product, it needs to be grown. I grew up here just a half a mile up the road from the cricket castle on a traditional corn and soybean farm, and I wanted nothing to do with agriculture or the state of Iowa or any of it. Luckily, I was pretty good at basketball, so I played basketball in college at St. Joseph's University out in Philadelphia, and then I went overseas and I played in Ireland. I got a master's degree in finance, and I worked as a banker over there for a little while before I decided I didn't want to do that. So I moved back home to this family farm I said I would never come back to, and started growing corn and soybeans with my dad. But he encouraged me to look at potential niche markets, something a little more where I could blaze my own path, and I landed on crickets. So I bought 10,000 2-week-old crickets on January 10th of 2018 and started selling them at the local farmers market, and I've just expanded since.
So how did you know how to raise crickets?
So when I first started this, I did not know how to raise crickets. I had no experience raising insects. I really had no experience raising any sort of animal. YouTube was my friend. I learned a lot of the basics from reptile keepers on YouTube, because if certain species of reptiles have to be live fed insects, and so people start their own colonies because live crickets are expensive. So they taught me the basics, honestly, and then it was just a lot of trial and error figuring out what works and what doesn't.
Awesome. And where did you get your name? I love Jiminy Crickets. That's so clever. So how did that come about?
I was just brainstorming names one night, and that one, for whatever reason, popped into my head. I really like puns, and so that one popped into my head, and I wrote it down, and the next day I decided it was my business name.
So I follow you on Facebook and Instagram. So looking at like nutrition-wise, it seems like crickets are pretty high in protein and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit more about nutritional value?
Yeah, so crickets are 64% protein. That protein level varies depending on what you feed them. We have a really high quality feed that's actually from Huxley, Iowa, just 7 miles down the road. One thing that does need to be in the feed, though, that most people don't know, is there needs to be some sort of complete animal protein in the feed. Otherwise, the crickets will cannibalize each other. Yes, many people don't realize that not all insects are exclusively herbivores, meaning that they eat, just vegetables and leafy things and stuff like that. A lot of people know of like a praying mantis. There's videos of praying mantis eating other insects that they've caught. But there's a lot of insects, including crickets, that are what I call opportunistic omnivores, and that given the opportunity to eat meat, they will. So if you don't give them the animal protein, because we have them in high population densities, they start to cannibalize, so we try to kind of prevent that. But anyway, so back to the nutrition. So they're 64% protein, they are high in iron, they have calcium, B12, and although you may not think of crickets as animals, technically they are. So they have all 9 essential amino acids in a bioavailable form, making them a complete protein. Is the feed.
And so it has that animal component in it, but what
Yes.
else is in there?
So it is non-GMO. It's a non-GMO grain blend, so it's corn and soybeans, and so there's some oats and things like that in it. So the feed actually does have to be either non-GMO or organic, because of the pesticide residues in conventionally grown grains is too high. So, and this is, you'll notice it's really finely milled, and that's just so it's easier for them to eat.
Now, how does that compare to like crickets in the wild?
So crickets in the wild eat whatever they can get their hands on. Just think of it like any other animal, if you will, in terms of animals in the wild. Whatever they can eat, whatever fruit is ripe, or vegetation that they typically eat, or like I said, in the case of crickets, if they can get their hands on a smaller insect, they'll eat it.
And then I've always wondered, what's the difference between a cricket and a grasshopper?
So they're completely different. Oh gosh, you're going to ask me sciencey terms on this. They're completely different trees of the insect world. Grasshoppers are technically locusts, and crickets are another one that I can't remember. So these right here are what you call pinheads. They jump out everywhere. They're tiny. You can probably see them better on my hand. Crickets don't have any sort of like larval stage. They hatch out, they look like baby crickets. They're called pinheads for a reason. So you'll notice the pans in there. Those are pans full of peat moss. So that's what we let the females lay their eggs in, and then they incubate for about 11 days. And then after they've incubated, they hatch out, and then we put them in their forever homes.
Do the females, so when the females are in there, then do you separate the females from the...
It's not like other livestock where you separate the females and the males. The males are the only ones that chirp, and then the females have a big long ovipositor. That's the way you can identify them. There's no need to separate them. They don't live much long past breeding anyways. We harvest them quite quickly. Crickets themselves in the wild only live about 5 months. In here, the max you could get them to live, because we keep conditions controlled, would be about 50 days. So there's no point.
Yeah. How many crickets would you guess are in here?
Probably anywhere between 1 to 2 million.
And like some of them are jumping out. So like, and I see some like on the floor and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that totally like normal and you don't worry about it because you're like...
Don't worry about it. Yep. So each female lays 5 to 10 eggs per day, up to 1,000 in her life. Having baby crickets is not a problem.
Yeah.
Having too many crickets is not a problem. So the males are ones that you hear. They don't have an ovipositor, but they're the ones that chirp. So anytime you hear a chirping cricket, it's always a male. And then the females, if you look down here on the feed, you'll notice like a spike coming out of the back end of that one. If you see that little spike at the end there, that's what she uses to lay her eggs. And then up there on the top, it's got a stubbier little spike. You can see it. That's a female that still needs to molt one more time. So crickets molt 7 to 8 times over their life. And once they're fully molted, that's when they are ready to lay cricket eggs.
And can you tell us what molting means?
Molting is shedding their skin. So they have, think of an exoskeleton is on the outside versus our skeleton's on the inside. So as we grow, everything around us, grows with us. But these guys, because their skeleton, the hard part is on the outside, in order to grow, they have to shed it so that they end up with a new exoskeleton. Like I said, 7 to 8 times over 45 days.
And do you put the rocks in the water just to help?
Put the rocks in the water so that they don't drown, because if you don't put the rocks in the water, crickets breathe out of holes in their sides called spiracles. And I say they're kind of like gills, but they're totally opposite in the way that gills work. Gills, you get water in to get the oxygen out. Spiracles, you get water in those holes and they just die. So even if it looks like shallow enough that they can absolutely walk out of it, they're overwhelmed and they die. So we put the rocks in there as a preventative measure.
All right. What is chores or caring for them? Like, what does a typical day look like?
Yeah, so it depends on the part of the life cycle. So when babies are hatching, obviously we're putting together habitats for them to live in for the next 40 days or so until they get their eviction notice. Otherwise, it's just food and water and checking on conditions, just like any other livestock. It's just smaller. So we check their water to see if they need more. We check their feed, see if they need more. As you start to hear them chirping, once there's more chirping than there is quiet, we put one of those breeding trays, one of those cake pans full of peat moss into the bin and let the females lay their eggs for 24 to 48 hours. And then we incubate them and we start all over. Ones are light brown, and the ones that we typically see outside here in Iowa are black. So the black ones are the field cricket. These brown ones, they're the house cricket. Their Latin name is Acata domesticus, so it's the common house cricket. They're native to Southeast Asia, so they're smaller than our native field crickets here in Iowa. They're also less aggressive, so these guys won't bite you, but the native field crickets will. And so the reason that we use these partly is because there's no regulations on shipping them across state lines live, whereas there are for other species, because these are a non-invasive species risk. They're native to Southeast Asia. They've never been able to establish a colony anywhere in the U.S., so that's one of the reasons. And then the other reason is their exoskeleton is softer, so that has a better mouth feel. Same reason that someone might feed these ones to a lizard, because they're just more bioavailable.
Okay, and then what does harvest look like?
Harvest, we take everything out. Oh, there's an example of molting. That one got the molt stuck. See? Oh, it ran away. I don't know if you got it, but
a little bit.
okay. The shedding of her skin. So harvest, we take everything out of these bins, and what's left then are the crickets. Their frass, which is just a nice name for their poop, which is dry. Looks kind of like sand, and then any like feed or leftover molts or anything like that. Those are all in the bottom. So we take all of that out, and then we stick a clean egg flat in there, and they crawl up it, and then we shake that off into an empty bin. And then at that point, we take them to Collins and we put them in the freezer, and that's how they are euthanized.
And can you tell us a little bit about some of the products you make with them?
Yes, so these are turned into, the very first step, like I said, is to freeze them, and then after that they are boiled, rinsed, and then dehydrated in like big food dehydrators, low and slow, so we preserve as many of the nutrients as we can. And then at that point, either we grind it into a powder, which we mix into, we have granola bars called cricket bars, or we sell that powder as is, 100% cricket powder. You can make smoothies, you can bake with it, all sorts of things you can do with that. Or we leave them whole and we season them and we roast them, and they taste a lot like a sunflower seed or a corn nut. So I have 8 flavors of my roasted crickets, I have 6 flavors of my cricket bar, and then 3 sizes of my 100% cricket powder.
What are some different flavors you use for the crunchy snacks?
Yes, I have barbecue, I have dill pickle, hot and spicy, chili lime, salt and pepper, buffalo ranch, maple chipotle, sea salt and pepper.
Do you have to have any special food license or anything like that?
Yes, so I am fully licensed by the state of Iowa as a food manufacturer. So I went the food manufacturing route, which ends up meaning I have to have a bunch of different certifications and things like that I had to do so I could write my food safety plan, so all of that stuff.
And do you sell strictly on your website, or do you go to trade shows, or how does that look?
Yes, so I do a lot of wholesale to grocery stores and things like that. I'm in some select Hy-Vees, and then I white label, which is where I manufacture the product and put it in someone else's packaging. So I white label for a company that sells on Amazon under a different brand. It's called Tricky Cricky. So I do that, and then I sell direct. I do farmers markets and state fair and things like that.
What would you say is the most challenging thing about raising crickets?
Every day isn't the same. No, the thing is every season is different. So ideal conditions are generally in the summer when we can get a lot of like fresh air moving in and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean, spring is different than winter, which is different than summer. Like it's an ever-changing, it's a living, breathing animal, so that is just challenging in itself. Anyone who's raised livestock knows that you can do everything right and they can all just decide to die. Okay, so I think my favorite part of the cricket farming is every day is different. So there's something new, there's always a different fire to put out. Either, we're at different parts of the life cycles, there's just a different activity to do. But I just appreciate that it's not the exact same thing every day. Long term, I just would really like to have this business grow to the point where maybe I don't have to be as involved and, can hire enough staff to keep things running.